Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. My name is AJay Raj, back with yet another eCore Express Java lesson for you all. This lesson is going to be on while loops. We're going to be building up off of our Unit 4 on loops. We just recently covered our for loops lesson in the previous lesson, and now we're going to be covering while loops, the second type of loop that we're going to be that's going to be very common in basic Java programming. So let's dive into while loops, understand their purpose, and how to actually utilize them in your program. See what they look like. Let's jump over to our Eclipse workspace. All right, as you can see on my screen, I pulled up my Eclipse workspace. All I did was I created a new set of notes for our while loops, and I just added it to our previous set of notes from our for loops lesson. All of our loops for this unit, anything on loops, are going to be in this same exact class. I called it loops lesson, so that you can keep all of your lessons on loops localized to one class. So I just added while loops on to our previous for loops lesson in the same class. So I'd highly encourage that you do the same. All right, so we're going to be taking our second stop in this loops unit, and we're going to be covering while loops. So what exactly are while loops, and how are they different or similar to for loops? So while loops are slightly different from a for loop in terms of their structure and how you go about actually processing them, the logic involved, but it has the same purpose of repeating a sequence of code. All of these loops have the same purpose, but what's special about for loops and while loops, you can actually use them interchangeably. You can choose either one. I personally prefer the for loop. I think it's more organized, but the while loop does have a little bit more code that you have to write outside of the actual loop, but it will still work in any situation that a for loop works. So it involves three parts like a for loop, but it has three different types of parts in terms of structure. It has to do with, the first part is an external counter. You have a conditional, just like your for loop. And then you also have an internal update. So unlike the update being built into the function, to the for loop, or the counter being built into the for loop, those two things are going to be a little bit different. Those are going to be separate variables. But the conditional is built into the for loop, so that's basically the same. So let's take a look at what an example for loop looks like. What does the structure look like? So this is a for loop right here. You can see, I apologize. What does a while loop look like? As you can see here, this is a basic structure of a while loop. It's signaled by that, that name here, while here. So that name here basically tells the code that I'm attempting to create this type of loop. So you have to look for this type of structure. All right, so the very first part that we have to do is we have to create a counter on the outside of our loop. So this is called an integer, right? We're going to create an integer called counter. This is going to be like creating any other integer in your code. You're going to declare it. You can either declare it at the very top of your code and then just assign it a value. Or what I like to do is, because this is a loop, normally loops are localized, so they're only located within the loop. But since a while loop doesn't have a built-in counter, you can just create a local variable. So you would just declare integer counter, and then you'd set it equal to whatever value you want, just like we did for loops, whatever value you wanted the counter to be equal to. So you can do all of that, declare and assign it in one line right above the while loop. Then you would enter the while loop here, and then you would use your conditional statement here, and then I'll specify exactly what the conditional looks like, but you're setting a condition for your counter, just like we set our I value, our integer I for the for loop equal to a value. We're setting a conditional for our counter, which is basically the variable I. And then within your code, you can use whatever code you want to repeat. And then we would do an internal update within the while loop's code itself. We would update our counter variable, basically our I variable. And then once the code is done, once the while loop has gone through all of its repetitions, you'll exit the while loop and go on and execute whatever code is left beneath that loop. All right, so we're going to scroll down, and we're going to look at what the three parts of the while loop actually mean, so that you understand the logic so that you can create your own while loop. All right, so the first part is your external counter. Like I said before, the while loop unfortunately doesn't have a built-in counter. So what we do is we're going to create a variable on the outside of our while loop. We're going to declare the integer right above the actual while loop, and we can assign it any value. It's oftentimes set to 0 or 1, whatever your starting amount is. Oftentimes I like to set it to 0. That way you can count how many repetitions your loop is going through. So oftentimes it's going to be 0. You would oftentimes name this variable as a counter just to specify what type of variable it is. Because it's not built into the loop, it's not as organized. So I would name it counter, or some counter should be somewhere in the name. That's going to count how many times the loop is going in regards to repetitions. So that's this little piece of code here. That's our external counter. All right, now the second part is our conditional. Our conditional is located right here within the while loop. It's built into the while loop. Just as the for loop is, it's built into the for loop. The while loop also has a built-in conditional. So all that conditional is setting is, this is the part of the while loop that creates a condition for the loop to keep repeating, as long as your previously created counter meets a certain condition. So all it's doing is it's setting a condition for your counter, meaning how many repetitions do you really want this while loop to run for. It's just saying your counter has to be less than, greater than, equal to, or not equal to, less than, or to a specific value y that you will set. So whatever value you want to set, say for example 5, you might want your counter to be greater than 5, greater than or equal to 5, less than 5, less than or equal to 5, or not equal to 5. Those are all symbols that I included here. As your less than sign, your greater than sign, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and then you'd set that equal to a certain variable that you want, and that's going to be your number. So that x there is just going to be whatever number you want to set the conditional equal to, or compare it to, basically. And then obviously the last part is going to be the update part, similar to the for loop, except that you're going to be taking that variable that you created on the outside, that counter variable, and all you're going to be doing is you're going to be increasing it, decreasing it, or changing it by a certain amount within the actual while loop code. The while loop does not have a built-in counter either, so this piece of code is located within the while loop and is part of the sequence of code. It allows you to make an update to the counter during every repetition of the while loop. So you just plug that piece of code in. Oftentimes you could do counter plus plus. Counter is the variable that you made, the initial variable that you made. You can do counter plus plus, which increases it by 1, counter minus minus, which decreases it by 1, or any other operation to change the value of counter. And obviously every time you do so in every repetition of the while loop, it's going to check your condition to see if it's less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or any certain value you set the condition equal to. All right. And when I mean whatever you set the condition equal to, it's whatever comparison you have within your condition. All right, so let's go ahead and create our while loop just to reinforce the notes that we just saw above. So the first step is to declare a counter and set it equal to a value. So we're going to say integer counter, and we're going to set this equal to 0. Now, as you can see here, I'm able to create a variable integer, and I can just set it integer. I can create a variable integer called counter, and I can set it equal to a value in the same line. That way it's more localized for our while loop. It's called local. It's not putting it at the very top, declaring at the top, so that you're going to use it throughout your code. This is just for our while loop, so we can declare it and assign it a value right above the while loop. So then we're going to type our while statement here, and then we're going to say our condition. Our condition is going to be within our parentheses. So what is our condition going to look like? All right, so we have our counter. We have it set equal to 0. Let's go ahead and start forming our actual piece of code. What is the code that we actually want to print out so that we can find out what our objective is? So I want to use that same system.out.println statement. Say hello world. And this time I want it to print out, let's say 15 times. I want this statement to print out a total of 15 times to our console. So if I want this line of code to print out 15 total times, that means I would want my counter less than 15. So what that's going to do is, since our counter is set equal to 0, the first time it goes through, it's going to put counter. It's going to plug it in. Our value of counter is equal to 0. So the first time it runs, it's going to say 0 is less than 15. So if that's correct, that means it's going to execute the code within the loop. And then at the very bottom, we're going to do our internal update. So we're going to say counter plus plus in this case, because we want to increase it by 1 every time, because every repetition is counted as 1. And then every time it goes through the loop, it'll say 0 is less than 15. It'll print out the statement, and then it'll update the counter, increase it by 1. So now the counter is equal to 1. Then it goes back up. It compares, is 1 less than 15. Then it goes through. It will never change the value of counter up here because it's outside of the loop. But it'll keep repeating, increasing by 1, until we hit 15. Once the counter is equal to 15, the while loop will stop. All right, let's go ahead and test this out and see if it worked. Let's hit play and see if our code is going to execute in our console. So let's see. So it printed out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 times. So this did work. We do have a working while loop, and most importantly, it worked to what our objective was. So it executed our objective. All right. So that was while loops. I know it was a little bit more complicated to understand loops overall, but going through these different types of loops hopefully will help to fill in any missing pieces or any sort of confusions that you have about loops. So make sure to copy this down along and practice along with me. All right, everyone. So that'll be it for today's lesson. I hope you all enjoyed. Please make sure to like and subscribe down below, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. Check out our website, or email us if you have any questions, and also see all of our socials down in the description box below if you're interested. So that'll be it for today's lesson. This has been AJay Raj, and I'll see you all in the next one.